Hello everybody, I am back again with another ramble, and I'm going to tell you this right now, strap yourselves in because this one is going to be a long one, and one that I've been very eager to share. So for those of you who don't know about this one, allow me to introduce you to it. This is The Ghost in the Shell, a cyberpunk science fiction manga created by Shirow Masamune, and it has become one of the biggest names in the anime and manga scene. I want to say that. It literally has become a franchise all on its own, and you will understand that further throughout the video. Let's first talk about the manga, first thing. This one really brings off like the 80s vibe of manga because of its detail and its drawing style, as you can probably tell by the front cover. And to be quite honest with you, I've actually really liked it. But you'll notice a stark contrast between the manga and the anime the further we go. For instance, when you look at the manga, you notice that there's a very big difference. Most of their panels have this more serious, investigative style to it, but there are moments throughout the manga that it starts adopting this cartoonish, very humorous, comedic scene. And to be honest with you, I think that actually suits it in a way because it kind of breaks everything off, and it doesn't make the series as serious as it normally is throughout the anime. Like if you notice a stark contrast here, there's a lot more comedy throughout the manga than there is the anime. Now to start off with, I first got this manga as a Christmas gift maybe 2 years back. It is really, really nice. And ever since then, I've been trying to keep up with any of the later manga that comes out as of right now. So far, there are about 3 books in this series, with Ghost in the Shell 1, 2, and 1.5. Now to find these in paperback would be very difficult, but I would definitely recommend getting the hardback collected editions, which comes in a really nice little box set. That way you can get all of the main series packaged into one single box. And for those of you who are interested, feel free to check it out for yourself. But now, let's get to the real meat of this topic, the anime. So to first start off with, you'll notice a stark contrast between this and the manga. For instance, Ghost in the Shell here 1 and 2 both have a much more realistic, much more serious tone to them than the manga does. But it really brings about a lot more philosophical questions, such as what exactly makes someone a human being, especially in this society where everyone is an advanced cyborg or has cybernetic implants, ranging from full-on cybernetic bodies with just a brain in a case, to just having a few cybernetic implants, but still primarily flesh and blood. And that is one of the biggest questions asked throughout the anime, is what exactly makes someone a human being? Now, Ghost in the Shell, the first movie, came out in like the 1990s, and since then it has remained a cult classic among anime fans. For those who are trying to introduce others to the anime scene, they usually recommend Ghost in the Shell for those who are into more adult scenarios. Now, the primary characters throughout this whole series has been Section 9. And these guys investigate multiple different cyber crimes throughout all of Japan. Now, the first movie centers around the plot of the Puppet Master, someone who has been sneaking around and hacking different ATMs, different people, and everything else. That is what the first movie covers, is them tracking the Puppet Master, whom, as they found out, spoiler alert by the way, is not in fact a single person, but rather is in fact a sentient AI, or artificial intelligence. And the whole twist of that really got me. Now, what's funny is that how they change things throughout the anime and the manga, one of the biggest differences lies in the ending, where after the Major suffers major damage, she actually gets transplanted into another body. Now the main differences here is that in the movie she gets transplanted into a child body that looks like herself. But in the manga, it's a bit funnier. It turns out Bato actually transplants her into the body of a guy. Needless to say, when I first saw this in the manga, I was just like, I was laughing. Because that's a huge twist that you would not actually expect. But Ghost in the Shell, the movies, was like the first taste I ever had of Ghost in the Shell. And since then, I've been obsessed with this franchise ever since, trying to get any scrap of it, or see any scrap of anime, or read any scrap of manga that I could ever find about this thing. Now, in contrast, Ghost in the Shell 2 was definitely a little bit harder to swallow. Mostly because in this one, the Major is not present until like the very end of the movie in Ghost in the Shell 2. And the story mainly revolves around Bato and Section 9 as they try to move on without the Major. And let me tell you right now, Ghost in the Shell 2 will definitely screw with your head. Oh my god, one of the creepiest scenes has to be when Bato and Togasa are tracking one of the perpetrators in this crime that they're investigating, which, as it turns out, is where all of these quote-unquote dolls, aka cyborgs that are used for personal pleasure, are just randomly committing murders and going haywire all over Japan. And at one point, they go into this massive mansion to hunt down who they think is one of the perpetrators, and they wind up in this massive loop. Like at one point, it could be one body, and then the next they charge into the mansion, and it's another body entirely. And you're left wondering, what the hell's going on? And some of the creepiest scenes had to be at one point when you see what looks like Togasa's robotic body talking to them and explaining the meaning of God envy, as they call it, where humanity is just slowly chipping away at its organs and its biology to the point where they are fully cybernetic. And let me tell you, that whole scene was absolutely chilling, in my opinion. So, take of it what you will with Ghost in the Shell 2. It still was entertaining, but maybe they could have toned down on the philosophical talk a little bit. That's one thing you notice. There are so many philosophical quotes in Ghost in the Shell 2 that it kind of just, how do I say it? It kind of got old real quick, to put it simply. It got tiresome to constantly hear a quote of philosophy 24/7. But I will say the action was definitely very good. Now, when it comes to the action in Ghost in the Shell, it has this more realistic vibe to it, where it's literally just cops chasing down other criminals. It's not exactly fast-paced like most other anime, it's very slow, but it tries to be somewhat realistic. Even so, it's still very entertaining, such as this one scene where Bato, in number 2, he goes after the Yakuza with this massive machine gun. And as soon as the Yakuza start pulling out swords and pistols, he just opens fire with this massive machine gun and completely mows them down. But another thing you notice is how each entry of Ghost in the Shell feels like its own universe. For instance, there's the manga, which operates as its own universe, and then there's these two. But now we are going to move on to the next topic. Next, we're going to talk about the anime series Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, which again could be considered another entry point into Ghost in the Shell for most of you. Now, Standalone Complex, how it really stands out from both the manga and the movies, is that Standalone Complex has a more detective-style story to it. I think that's the right way to put it, story-wise. It's much more detective, cybercrime, investigative, stuff like that. And it mainly tells the stories of Section 9 throughout the first and second season. And the thing is, this show lasted for about 2 seasons worth, each one being about 25 or 26 episodes each season. So it lasted for quite a while. And this one came out in like the early 2000s too, which in my opinion was probably a golden time for anime at the time. But anyways, moving on. So I was actually surprised when I found this title one time while I was skimming through Xfinity On Demand through all the anime titles on Adult Swim. And I found this and I was like, huh, I didn't even know Ghost in the Shell even had a full anime. So then I started watching it, and my God, for the next few weeks I was absolutely hooked trying to finish both seasons of this show. Now, for season 2, it's under the subtitle of Second Gig for those of you who are going to be looking for that. And let me tell you, trying to find a DVD copy of this, of any of this show, will definitely be a hassle. So if you can, I would recommend getting the Blu-ray discs at the very least, because it might be a little bit easier to get those. But I will tell you this, it is definitely worth it if you want a more investigative style story surrounding 2 seasons worth throughout this. Whereas it is also sprinkled with a lot of other bits of philosophy here and there. It's not overly saturated like it is in the movies. There are bits and pieces, there are learning bits, but at the same time it mostly focuses more towards action and investigation. Now it is a little wordy, but then again, what anime really isn't? But the one downside I could put to this show was the Tachikomas. And for those of you who don't know, the Tachikomas are kind of like the sentient vehicles for Section 9. They operate as like these armored vehicles with machine guns, investigative equipment with like grappling hooks, um, thermal camouflage, the ability to hack into other systems with their AIs. They're very useful, but honestly, the voices of them really tended to annoy me a lot, just because they have this like childish voice to them that kind of really grates on you until you get used to it after a few episodes. That's the only downside I could think of. Other than that, this show is an absolute gold mine for those of you who are just looking for like a classic adult style anime. That is not a shonen or anything else like it. And honestly, the music for the intros is what really sells it for me. Both the openings for seasons 1 and 2 are very good, and they're done by Origa, a Russian songwriter who is now deceased as of this time. May they rest in peace. But I would highly recommend this to those who want a different entry point for Ghost in the Shell. But now, let's move on. So as of right now, these are the latest additions to the Ghost in the Shell franchise. On the far left, you will see Ghost in the Shell Arise. Now, Arise actually functions as a type of prequel to the whole series, where it shows the formation of Section 9, but in a way it also serves as a soft reboot of the whole thing, because it gives a different backstory to the Major, whilst also giving details of how Section 9 was formed. And you can tell the difference that this was years ago because everyone in Section 9 in this story looks far younger. The animation was really, really good in this one. It's not like Ghost in the Shell, the movie, where it has the 90s aesthetic, or even Standalone Complex, where it has that early 2000s look. But this one definitely nails it with this mix of 3D CGI when it needs it, but primarily 2D animation. I have not seen the full OVA series of this, but it was really good, and for those of you who want a more action-based entry into Ghost in the Shell, Arise is the best way to go, because there is a total of 4 OVAs, and the new Ghost in the Shell movie, which put a cap on the whole Arise series. Now, manga-wise, there is a new volume called The Ghost in the Shell, The Human Algorithm. Now, funnily enough, I was looking through the bookstore and I found this manga, and I was so surprised because I actually thought the manga was over. And I found out that Human Algorithm supposedly fills in more of the gap in between Ghost in the Shell 1.5 and Ghost in the Shell 2. And it highlights more on how Section 9 is progressing without the Major. But I'm honestly really excited to see where this story goes. There's currently only one volume out for this manga, but there is a volume 2 scheduled for release in English in October. Needless to say, I will definitely be picking it up just to see how the story ends because, oh my god! If there's one thing I hate, it's cliffhangers. Especially when it comes to when you're trying to keep up with certain manga. At that time, that huge cliffhanger that it leaves you on and it leaves you hungry for more. Oh, it is so irritating. And that's what I've been waiting on for Ghost in the Shell Human Algorithm Volume 2. I might go back and reread this just to kind of keep myself up to date and refresh my memory on it. But anyways, so moving on to the last one, this is by far the most recent of entries. Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex 2045, an original series created by Netflix. Now, I'm not really sure whether to call this a sequel to the original Standalone Complex series, but in this case, I'll probably go along with it. So, Standalone Complex 2045 is very different from all the previous entries due to the fact that it is full 3D animation. And I know that a lot of people are not really huge fans of 3D animation, but compared to most previous titles, Standalone Complex 2045 definitely has a much more smoother animation style than most of the other 3D anime that I have seen, which usually has a much more rougher texture to it. All in all, I'd still check it out if you are a Ghost in the Shell fan, but just keep it with a pinch of salt. It's not perfect, I haven't finished it yet. I probably will at some point jump back into it just to say, hey, I've got this done. So far, there's only one season of it, of about 12 episodes for it on Netflix, but there is plans for a second season, which will wrap it up with about 24 episodes total for this series. But these are the latest in Ghost in the Shell as of right now, just to let you all know. And finally, last but not least, we're going to talk about the Ghost in the Shell movie that was released in 2017. Now, for those of you who have recognized that this is a live-action adaptation, yes. And needless to say, it got a lot of backlash when it was first announced, especially when they decided to cast Scarlett Johansson as the main lead for this movie as the Major. But I will say this. The Ghost in the Shell live-action adaptation is not all bad. Granted, it kind of mixes elements of both Ghost in the Shell 1 and 2 in there, while it's also giving a unique backstory for the Major, which I honestly found pretty interesting. Granted, I did not really see this whole movie, because the first time and the only time I watched it, I accidentally fell asleep halfway through the movie, and completely missed it up until the end when the Major was fighting against the Puppet Master. And to be quite honest, from what I do remember, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't necessarily good either. It's kind of in the middle for me. Just because it tries to stay faithful to the series that it is representing, but even so, trying to adapt an anime into a live action sometimes can have very poor or very successful releases, to be quite honest with you, because there are some that are just never gonna work, and there are some that do well but aren't exactly memorable. I may or may not go back and watch this just to kind of see the details that I missed from when I fell asleep. But all in all, you could consider this another entry point to give you like a taste if you want to see more. But to close all this off, like I've said before at the beginning of this video, Ghost in the Shell is a massive franchise with multiple points of entry for those of you who are willing to give this a shot. You can either start with the manga, the first 2 movies, the anime standalone complex, the live-action adaptation, or even Ghost in the Shell Arise. It's up to you to pick where you want to start. But all in all, I would recommend giving this franchise a shot if you really want to take a look at a classic cyberpunk anime that still stands as a classic among anime fans to this day. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Have a good day.